Welcome back to Zarila HOA Stories. We are so glad you're here. Drop your country or city in comments. Now let's begin Chapter 1, A Normal Evening. It was just another evening in the Miller house, the kind of night that seemed so ordinary it felt safe. Daniel sat at the dining table, scrolling on his phone, while his younger sister Lily laughed at something on the television. Their mother, Clara, was in the kitchen preparing dinner, humming quietly as she moved from the stove to the counter. Everything looked normal, almost peaceful, like nothing bad could ever happen there. Their father, Ethan, came home a little later than usual. He placed his keys on the table and let out a tired sigh, but no one thought much about it. Ethan often worked long hours, and nights like this were not rare. He greeted his wife with a quiet hello, kissed her on the cheek, and then sat in his usual chair. Lily smiled at him and asked about his day. For a moment, everything looked like the picture of a normal family. Daniel noticed, though, that his father seemed distant. His eyes were tired, almost heavy, and his words came slower than usual. Still, nothing about him seemed dangerous. It was just the tired look of a man carrying the weight of work and responsibility. Daniel brushed it off, not knowing how important these little signs would later feel. Dinner that night was simple: roasted chicken, vegetables, and bread. Lily was in her usual cheerful mood, talking about her friends at school, her upcoming exams, and the plans she had for the weekend. She made jokes and laughed loudly, filling the room with energy. Ethan listened but stayed mostly quiet, nodding from time to time, not showing much expression. Clara, trying to keep the conversation warm, asked Ethan about his day, but his answers were short. To Daniel, it was just another quiet family dinner, one where his sister's laughter kept things alive. He remembered watching her wave her fork around as she spoke, her eyes bright with excitement. She was full of life, full of plans, and nothing about that moment suggested that tragedy was near. After dinner, Clara cleaned the dishes while Lily went to her room to finish some homework. Ethan remained in his chair, staring into the distance. Daniel thought maybe his father was simply exhausted. He gave him a small nod before heading upstairs to his own room. The house was calm, filled only with the soft sound of plates clinking in the sink and the faint music coming from Lily's room. At that time, Daniel felt nothing unusual. He didn't know that this night would be burned into his memory forever. He didn't know that this ordinary evening, with its laughter and silence, would be the last time he would ever see his sister alive in such peace. The night seemed normal, almost boring, but behind the quiet routine was something waiting to break. None of them could see it, none of them could stop it. For Daniel, that evening would always be remembered as the calm before the storm. Chapter 2, The Unsettling Signs. In the days leading up to that night, Daniel had started to notice small changes in his father. Ethan was not the same man he used to be. He was quicker to anger, snapping over small things like a misplaced remote or a late dinner. His temper flared, but just as quickly, he would go quiet, locking himself in his room for hours. Daniel thought it was just stress from work, but deep down, something felt wrong. Lily noticed it too. One evening, she whispered to Daniel that their dad scared her sometimes. She said his eyes looked different, colder, like he wasn't really there. Daniel tried to comfort her, saying it was nothing, that their father was just tired. He didn't want her to worry. But in truth, he felt uneasy as well. Clara, their mother, tried her best to keep the family together. Whenever Ethan raised his voice, she calmed him down and changed the subject. She believed that if they just ignored his moods, things would get better. But the silence only made the tension worse. The house didn't feel the same anymore. There was an invisible weight pressing down on everyone. Lily spent more time in her room, keeping her distance. Daniel tried to stay out of the way, pretending things were fine. But each day, the signs grew stronger: Ethan's late nights, his blank stares, the way he sometimes muttered under his breath when no one was around. Daniel didn't realize it then, but those were warnings. Subtle, chilling signs that the man they called Dad was slowly slipping away into someone unrecognizable. Chapter 3, The Breaking Point. The tension in the Miller house grew heavier with each passing day. Small arguments turned into loud fights, and silence turned into something more dangerous. Ethan was no longer just tired, he seemed angry at everything. The slightest mistake made him lash out. A dropped glass, a late reply, even laughter at the wrong time could spark his rage. One evening, the argument began over something small. Lily had forgotten to take out the trash, and Ethan exploded. His voice echoed through the house, shaking both Daniel and Clara. Lily tried to defend herself, saying she had homework and would do it later, but that only made things worse. Ethan slammed his hand on the table, and the sharp sound silenced everyone. Clara rushed in, trying to calm him down, but Ethan's face was red with fury. Daniel watched from the corner, frozen, unsure if he should step in or stay back. For the first time, he felt real fear in his father's presence. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was something darker, something he couldn't explain. That night, Ethan left the house without a word. He didn't return until hours later, long after everyone had gone to bed. Daniel heard the door creak open and the heavy footsteps across the floor. He didn't sleep much, lying awake, wondering what was happening to the man he once looked up to. The breaking point wasn't just one argument, it was the slow build of anger, silence, and fear. By then, the family no longer felt like a family. They were walking on thin ice, waiting for it to crack. And soon, it would. Chapter 4, The Night of Terror. The night that would change everything began in silence. The Miller house was unusually still, with only the faint hum of the refrigerator breaking the quiet. Daniel was in his room, scrolling through his phone, while Lily worked on her homework. Clara had gone to bed early, hoping to avoid another argument with Ethan. Ethan sat alone in the living room, his face hidden in the shadows. His breathing was heavy, his hands restless. Something about him felt off, more dangerous than before. It was as if the anger he had been carrying for weeks had finally reached its limit. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the silence. Daniel jumped up and rushed to the hallway. Lily's terrified scream followed, echoing through the house. Heart racing, Daniel froze, his mind unable to process what was happening. He saw Ethan storming into Lily's room, his face twisted with rage. Lily tried to back away, pleading with him to stop, but her words only seemed to fuel his anger. Clara rushed in, crying, begging Ethan to calm down, but he shoved her aside. The house, once filled with laughter, now felt like a battlefield. Daniel wanted to move, to stop his father, but fear held him in place. He could only watch in horror as the nightmare unfolded before his eyes. The sound of Lily's screams, the violence, the chaos, it all blended into a moment that felt unreal, like something out of a bad dream. By the time silence returned, nothing in the Miller home would ever be the same again. The night had stolen away their peace, their trust, and Lily's life. Chapter 5, The Aftermath at Home. The house fell into a silence that was heavier than anything Daniel had ever felt. The walls, once filled with laughter and daily routines, now echoed with the memory of Lily's screams. Everything around him looked the same, the furniture, the pictures on the walls, but nothing felt familiar anymore. It was as if the home itself had died along with his sister. Clara sat in the corner of the living room, her face buried in her hands, sobbing quietly. She couldn't bring herself to look at Ethan, who stood motionless, his eyes blank, as if he didn't even realize what he had done. Daniel stayed frozen, his body shaking, unable to make sense of the horror he had just witnessed. The room was filled with broken things, scattered papers, a broken lamp, and the faint smell of blood lingering in the air. Daniel wanted to scream, but his voice wouldn't come. Every second stretched longer, like time itself refused to move. Fear battled with shock. Should he run? Should he call the police? Should he try to comfort his mother? His thoughts spun wildly, but he couldn't focus. All he could hear in his head was Lily's laughter from earlier that week, now gone forever. Ethan finally moved, sitting heavily in his chair, staring at the floor like nothing mattered anymore. Clara whispered his name, her voice trembling, but he didn't respond. Daniel realized at that moment that his father was no longer the man he once knew. The house that once held love and warmth had become a place of shadows. The aftermath of that night left only silence, fear, and the unbearable truth that Lily would never return. Chapter 6, Police and Secrets Revealed. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness outside the Miller home. Neighbors gathered quietly on the street, whispering as police officers rushed inside. Daniel sat on the couch, numb, his mother holding his hand tightly. Ethan didn't resist when the officers approached him. He simply lowered his head, almost as if he knew this moment was coming. Detective Sarah Cole was the first to speak. Her calm but firm voice filled the tense silence. She asked Daniel and Clara to explain what had happened, but Daniel could barely get the words out. Clara broke down in tears, shaking as she described the nightmare that had unfolded. As Ethan was handcuffed, more truths began to surface. Detective Cole revealed that Ethan had been struggling with more than just stress from work. There were reports of financial troubles, gambling debts, and even a history of violent outbursts that he had kept hidden from his family. To the outside world, Ethan Miller was a hardworking father. Behind closed doors, he had been battling demons no one had seen. Daniel's heart sank as he listened. It wasn't just a random outburst, it was years of anger, secrets, and lies that had finally exploded. He couldn't believe the man who had once taught him how to ride a bike, who had smiled in family photos, was now being led away as a murderer. The officers carried Lily's body out on a stretcher, and Daniel felt his world collapse all over again. Nothing could erase that image from his mind. The truth was out, but it brought no comfort. Instead, it left him with more questions. How long had his father been hiding this darkness, and could anyone have stopped it before it was too late? Chapter 7, Living with the Shadow. Days turned into weeks, but the Miller home never felt alive again. The laughter that Lily once brought had been replaced by silence and heavy grief. Every room carried memories of her, from the books on her desk to the posters on her bedroom wall. Daniel couldn't walk past her door without feeling his chest tighten. The town whispered constantly. Some neighbors avoided the family, while others stared with pity whenever Daniel or Clara stepped outside. To everyone, they were the family destroyed by their own father. Daniel felt trapped in that label. He wasn't just Lily's brother anymore, he was also the son of a killer. School became unbearable. Friends didn't know what to say. Some asked awkward questions, others kept their distance. Daniel often sat alone, wishing for things to feel normal again, though deep down he knew they never would. Clara drifted further into silence. She barely ate, barely spoke, and spent most of her time in Lily's room, holding on to her daughter's clothes as if that could bring her back. Daniel tried to stay strong for her, but he felt himself breaking too. Nights were the hardest. The house was too quiet, and the memories too loud. He often woke up hearing Lily's laughter in his dreams, only to remember she was gone. The shadow of Ethan's actions followed them everywhere. Even behind bars, his presence haunted their lives. Daniel couldn't stop replaying that night, wondering if there was something he could have done, something that might have saved Lily. The guilt, the anger, and the sorrow became his constant companions. Living with the shadow of what happened wasn't just about surviving, it was about learning to breathe again in a world that would never be the same. Chapter 8, The Final Reflection. Time passed, but the pain never truly left. Daniel often found himself sitting by the window, staring at the night sky, wondering if Lily could see him from somewhere beyond. The world outside moved on, neighbors returned to their routines, the whispers faded, and people stopped asking questions. But inside Daniel's heart, the wound remained open. He thought a lot about family, about trust, and how quickly it could all be broken. Ethan had once been his hero, the man he looked up to, but now he was nothing more than a haunting memory. Daniel struggled to understand how a father could take the life of his own daughter. There was no answer that made sense. Some nights, he tried to hate Ethan completely, but other nights he remembered the father who had once laughed with them, and that confusion tore him apart. Clara carried her grief quietly, visiting Lily's grave every week with flowers. Daniel often joined her, standing in silence, feeling the weight of what was lost. He would place his hand on the cold stone and whisper the words he never got to say, "I'm sorry. I should have protected you." The tragedy became more than just a family story, it became a reminder of how fragile life truly is. Daniel realized that memories are both a gift and a burden. They keep a loved one alive in the heart, but they also remind you of what you can never get back. In the end, Daniel promised himself one thing: Lily's story would not fade into silence. He would carry her laughter, her dreams, and her light forward, no matter how heavy the shadow behind him.